Yeah, he was involved in these neoconservative think tanks for throughout the 1990s, and was very well known in that circle.
And he's
a member of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. I mean, that's one of the main neoconservative lobbying groups. Well, the fact that our vice president, who's not Jewish, was involved in that just shows how close his ties were.
But I guess yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I guess I was just going to sum up what we were talking about earlier, and while we're over there, I guess it could come down to the simplest answer. When a government fills the positions of highest power with Jewish people, they are going to do inherently what is best for them and their loyalty, and that would be Israel. So I guess when you have a government that is in large part filled with Jews, they're going to do what's right by them. Does it just come down to that?
Well, I think that's true, but I always want to say, I always write this, that it's not all Jews. I mean, we're talking about a group. In fact, these neocons are not even a majority of Jews. Most Jews are still on the left. They're still harking back to the long, a relationship between Jews and the Democratic Party and the sort of left-wing movements in this country. So it's a matter of a particular set of Jews, and the fact is that the organized Jewish community is now dominated by people who are strongly associated with the far right in Israel. They are expansionists. They're linked with the settler movements, the religious fundamentalists, and they basically want to expand the territory of Israel at the expense of the Palestinians. That's what's really going on over there. But again, I mean, you see now that the organized Jewish community and these neocons are really trying to suppress dissent within the Jewish community. They can't stand someone like Tony Jute, would write something for the New York Times where he's critical of the neocons and calling attention to some of these, the fact that these neocons are Jewish and so on. So it's no secret anymore, and they're trying to suppress the actual dissent within the Jewish community because it is there. But the organized Jewish community is gung-ho in favor of these very expansionist policies in Israel, and the same political agenda as the neocons.
Well, and I guess too, we can't heap all the blame on the perpetrators. I think at some point responsibility has to be laid at the feet of the American people.
It absolutely does. Absolutely does.
And their naivete. You wrote a passage in one of your recent columns that I really appreciated, and I wanted to share it with the audience and then get your take on it. And you wrote this: the vast majority of Americans live under the comfortable illusion that theirs is a free country. They suppose that issues are openly and honestly debated in the newspapers and on talk shows. In this imaginary world, all issues affecting public policy are on the table and are constantly scrutinized by the best and the brightest. That's not the way it really is, though, is it?
It's not the way it really is. And that's the sad thing. I mean, and the fact is, most Americans, unless they're, unless they are actively involved in the internet, they're really not aware of this stuff yet because there's a sort of blanketing of the mainstream media and talk shows and so on. You just don't hear this kind of stuff discussed, and it's a sort of self-censorship, because people know what happens when you violate that. We see what happens when President Carter does. We see what happens when Mir Sherman won't. We see what happens when I do it. There's immediate, very strong reaction. So to some extent, it's ignorance, but it's also fear. The people who know are afraid to do anything. I mean, you have these politicians like Paul Finley. I mean, he stood up to Israel 25 years ago, and he lost a seat in Congress. That's all that happened. So people know what the score is, that you can't really fight these people without taking a huge hit. And that's the way it is.
Well, and unfortunately, that is the way it is. And of course, you've got a man of your stature, your intellect. You represent a prestigious university, and even you're coming down with these scurrilous adjectives. And it seems as though even questioning whether or not our current foreign policy or immigration policy is what's in our best interest, even just objectively questioning that is enough to warrant accusations of bigotry and anti-Semitism these days. Why is there such censorship in America now?
It's just remarkable. I mean, just the case with immigration. You can't even, have a discussion about the economic effects of immigration. Even whether it's legal or not legal. I mean, in the last year, we finally started to talk about immigrants that are not legal, the illegals. But we still don't talk about the million of legal immigrants and the change this is producing in the country, and the huge dislocations and the cultural conflicts they were seeing more and more every day. You can't talk about that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like we almost live in a Soviet Union, only sort of a soft version where you don't go to the gulag, but you're ignored, you're marginalized. What?
I mean, we were just saying not yet.
Yeah, not yet. I mean, I think that people like the Southern Poverty Law Center and, Heidi Byers, they would love to put people in jail. I mean, they would just love to do that. And I think they would, look fondly towards the day when they could lock up all their enemies. But, still we have is the First Amendment, so we can still do this kind of stuff. We'll see how long it lasts. I don't know.
Well, Dr. Macdonald, one thing that you've talked about a lot is the group evolutionary strategy as it applies to Jews, and you have mentioned in some of your writings that they've had this long history in the various nations of which they populated of gaining power through the various tactics that they employ, and that's certainly the case here in America today. And we talked about, and you're right. It's not to say that every leader in our government is Jewish. That's certainly not true, but it does. The fact still remains that many of them do have dual loyalties with two different countries, America and Israel. Is that a concern worth our attention?
Well, absolutely. I think that that you're talking about a group that simply has way more power than their numbers. You're talking about a group with great wealth. If you look at the main contributors to the Democratic Party, it's without Jewish money they would basically be bankrupt. So it's in the political process, but also in the media. And, they're very intelligent, they work very hard, and they're very good at what they do. But the result is that they have this incredible ability to influence the political process and the culture and issues like immigration and so on. And so, in the end, in my book on anti-Semitism, fundamentally what you see across history is that eventually groups that where there are conflicts of interest with Jews develop, anti-Jewish attitudes and movements and so on.
Right. So
the real source of anti-Semitism in general is conflicts of interest, rational conflicts of interest, where Jews have a great deal of power. And of course, we see in our country now that Jews do have a great deal of power, but at this point, there are no anti-Jewish movements, and I'm not advocating any such thing, but I think that Jews should be aware that these issues of dual loyalty are really coming to a head now. And I think that a lot of smart, honest people are understanding that there's something wrong here when the foreign policy of this country is basically being driven by an agenda of a different country and different people.
And that's not hate to take a look at that and say, I don't know if this is in the best interest of our country, the country that our ancestors carved out of a wilderness. And I think that's just a love of your own country, patriotism or nationalism, to stand up and say, we need to take another look at this and reassess whether or not we want this certain element of our population calling the shots. But it seems as though, regardless of the disaster, these people are they are intent on staying the course. With regards to the Middle East, enter Iran. I mean, they are foaming at the mouth to get in there. Well, I hate asking people to give predictions, but what do you foresee taking place in Iran and in Iraq, for that matter, over the next few months?
Yeah, we're seeing a very definite build-up to some kind of military conflict. I can't believe that the United States could be involved in this directly, because the war in Iraq is such a disaster. We've spent so much money, and so many men and women have died. It's just an absolute disaster, and I don't think the American people stand for it. But I think that Israel, I think that Israel would love to have this job done by the Americans, but I don't think that's doable. But I think that they will then take it upon themselves. I don't know exactly when, but there's no question, and there's an obvious trend here where they're sort of heating up the rhetoric. You see that every day. Just recently, Israel, the Prime Minister had a news conference where they talked about the Holocaust in Iran and how something has to be done and so on. So they're definitely putting on the heat here. Something's going to happen. I think probably this year, but I'm not sure. I mean, there are these non-military sanctions and so on that they're trying, but